I remember sitting in the grand ballroom of our New York mansion, surrounded by chandeliers, polished marble floors, and hundreds of guests applauding my stepson Blake. Vanessa, my wife, leaned toward him with that smug smile I had come to hate, whispering, "Soon it'll all be yours, your father will be irrelevant." And just like that I felt invisible, erased from the life I had built. Everyone cheered as Blake accepted praise meant for me, the man who had created the $75 million company, who had built this empire brick by brick, and yet, in their eyes, I was too old to matter. My stomach twisted with humiliation, my hands clenched under the table. I had prepared for this moment, yet nothing could have readied me for the crushing sting of betrayal. Then, as Vanessa smirked and Blake raised his glass in a mock toast, a hush fell over the room. Judge Nathaniel Pierce appeared, unexpected, imposing, holding a thick, sealed file. "You forgot the final clause," he said, and the laughter froze mid-air. In that instant the balance shifted, and the family who had written me off as irrelevant was about to see the truth. My truth. The morning light filtered through the floor-to-ceiling, windows of my Manhattan office, casting long shadows across the polished hardwood floors. At 63, I still arrived before everyone else, a habit formed decades ago when crosstech was just a dream scribbled on coffee-stained napkins. I traced my fingers across the mahogany desk, the same desk where I'd signed my first $1 million contract 20 years ago. "Mr. Cross, your 9 a.m. is waiting," my assistant Caroline announced through the intercom. I straightened my tie and took a deep breath. The face that greeted me in the reflection of my computer screen showed lines of experience, not weakness. Yet lately, those lines seemed to be all Vanessa could see. The boardroom buzzed with anticipation as I entered. 12 executives fell silent, their attention shifting to me, Benjamin, Cross, founder and CEO of Crosstech Industries. I'd built this company from nothing, transforming a small tech startup into a $75 million enterprise that pioneered renewable energy solutions. "Gentlemen, ladies," I nodded, taking my seat at the head of the table. "Let's discuss the Palmer merger." 2 hours later, as the meeting concluded successfully, I couldn't help but notice the side glances between our CFO Marcus and my stepson Blake, who had insisted on joining the company 3 years ago, despite having no qualifications beyond being married to my wife. At 32, Blake possessed an MBA he barely earned and an entitlement he flaunted shamelessly. "Excellent presentation, Ben," Marcus said, though his eyes darted to Blake as if seeking approval. "Thanks," I replied, gathering my papers. "Blake, a word?" My stepson followed me to my office, his designer shoes clicking confidently against the marble floor. He lounged in the chair across from my desk, one leg casually crossed over the other. "You wanted to talk about my proposal?" he asked, a smirk playing on his lips. His proposal to divest our renewable energy division went against everything I'd built. "It's not happening, Blake. That division is the future of Crosstech." He leaned forward, dropping all pretense of respect. "The future, Ben. Let's be honest. You won't be around to see that future much longer. The board is concerned about succession planning." "The board?" I repeated, feeling my jaw tighten. "Or you and your mother?" Blake shrugged. "Mom's just being practical. You're 63. Most men your age are playing golf and forgetting their grandchildren's names. The company needs young blood." I maintained my composure, something I'd perfected through decades of business negotiations. "When I decide to step down, the board will know. Until then, I suggest you focus on learning how this company actually works." Later that evening, I pulled into the circular driveway of our Upper East Side mansion. The neo-Georgian facade with its stately columns had once filled me with pride. Now it felt like entering enemy territory. The click of my key in the lock was followed by the distant sound of laughter from the living room. Vanessa's voice carried down the hallway. "He still thinks he's in control. It's almost sad, really." I paused, my coat half removed. Through the partially open doctor, I could see Vanessa, radiant at 45, sipping champagne with Blake and her sister Melanie. My wife's beauty had been what first drew me to her, those piercing blue eyes and elegant features. Now those same features were animated with cruelty I couldn't fathom. "Did you see his face in the board meeting?" Blake snickered. "When I mentioned retirement planning, like a deer in headlights." "The board respects me," Vanessa assured him, twirling her glass. "They know Benjamin's time is ending. After Blake's graduation ceremony next week, we'll accelerate the transition. The mansion, the company, even that ridiculous Tesla he loves so much. It's all practically yours already. I retreated silently, slipping into my study without announcing my presence. My sanctuary, walls lined with books, achievements, and memories of a life built through persistence and vision. I poured myself 2 fingers of scotch and settled into my leather chair, the weight of betrayal heavier than any business challenge I'd ever faced. I'd met Vanessa at a charity gala a decade ago. Recently widowed, she'd seemed genuine in her admiration of my work, intelligent in her observations, and refreshingly direct. Our whirlwind romance had culminated in marriage within 6 months. Blake, then a college student, had been part of the package, a sullen young man who eventually warmed to me when he realized the lifestyle I could provide. For years, I'd ignored the warning signs. Vanessa's growing impatience with my long work hours, her increasingly lavish spending, the way she and Blake formed a united front in family decisions. I dismissed these as normal family tensions, believing love would overcome them. The soft glow of my desk lamp illuminated the framed photo of my late first wife, Eleanor. "You tried to warn me, didn't you?" I whispered. Eleanor had been my partner in every sense, supportive, honest, kind. After her death from cancer 15 years ago, I'd thrown myself into work, building Crosstech into an empire that would have made her proud. My phone buzzed with a message from Judge Nathaniel Pierce, an old friend from my early days in New York. "Documents ready as requested. Are you certain about this, Ben?" I typed back, more certain than ever. Setting down my phone, I opened my laptop and reviewed the legal documents I'd been quietly preparing for months. Not out of vindictiveness, but self-preservation. As Vanessa and Blake plotted my professional demise downstairs, they remained oblivious to one critical fact. I had never transferred ownership of my company, this house, or any significant assets into Vanessa's name. Our prenuptial agreement was ironclad, and unbeknownst to them, I'd been documenting their conversations, interactions with board members, and attempts to undermine my authority. I closed the laptop, a sense of calm replacing my earlier hurt. Blake's graduation ceremony from his executive MBA program was next week. The event they'd chosen as their moment of triumph, the public beginning of my supposed irrelevance. Little did they know I had chosen it as mine. Blake's graduation ceremony was scheduled at the Riverside Grand Hotel, an opulent venue overlooking the Hudson River. Vanessa had insisted on hosting an extravagant after-party at our mansion, not just to celebrate Blake's achievement, but to introduce him as the heir apparent to Crosstech's partners and investors. 200 guests, she announced over breakfast 5 days before the event, not bothering to look up from her tablet. "I've invited everyone who matters in New York business." "Everyone who matters," I echoed, sipping my coffee. Her eyes flicked up, cold and calculating. "You should wear the navy Brioni suit. It makes you look distinguished." The pause before distinguished spoke volumes. It was her code word for acceptably old. "I'll choose my own suit, thank you," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. Vanessa set down her tablet, studying me, with the appraising look she'd perfected. "Benjamin, darling, is something bothering you? You've been so quiet lately." I smiled, the practiced smile of a businessman who'd negotiated with sharks for decades, just thinking about the future. "The future," she repeated, seemingly pleased. "Yes, we should discuss that. Blake has some wonderful ideas for restructuring the executive team." "I'm sure he does." Later that day, I met Judge Pierce at his office downtown. Nathaniel had been a friend since law school, long before he'd taken the bench. His office was a sanctuary of old-world professionalism, leather-bound books, certificates of achievement, and a window overlooking the city we both loved. "Everything's prepared according to your instructions," he said, sliding a sealed folder across his desk. "Though I must ask again if you're certain about this approach." I picked up the folder, feeling its weight, physical and metaphorical. "They've left me no choice, Nate. You didn't hear them planning, calculating, treating me like a relic to be discarded." Nathaniel leaned back in his chair, his experienced eyes assessing me. "It's not too late to confront them directly. Perhaps counseling." "This isn't about saving my marriage," I interrupted. "It's about preserving what I've built. They don't want reconciliation. They want acquisition." I tucked the folder into my briefcase. "Will you be there?" He nodded, as requested. "Though I still think—" "I know what you think," I said, softening my tone. And in a better world, you'd be right. But you haven't seen what I've seen. As I left his office, a text from Blake appeared on my phone. Need your signature on some board resolutions before the ceremony. Just formalities. We'll bring them home tonight. The audacity was almost admirable. I typed back a simple OK and pocketed my phone. That evening, Blake arrived with a leather portfolio tucked under his arm, finding me in my study. He wore the satisfied look of a man who believed he was several moves ahead in a game of chess. Just some standard governance updates, he said, placing several documents before me. The board unanimously approved them yesterday. I flipped through the pages slowly, noting what he wasn't pointing out. Buried in the standard updates were provisions that would significantly dilute my voting power and create an executive committee with authority to override CEO decisions. Interesting reading, I said, setting them aside. I'll review these properly tomorrow. Blake's confidence faltered slightly. We need them filed before the ceremony. Time-sensitive matters. All the more reason to review them carefully, wouldn't you agree? He hesitated, then recovered with practiced charm. Of course. Thoroughness is what built Crosstech after all. He rose to leave, then paused. By the way, Mum wanted me to check if you've prepared your speech for the party. Speech? Your retirement announcement, he said casually. Mum thought after the main celebration would be perfect timing, going out on a high note and all that. The boldness of their assumptions struck me like a physical blow, but decades of business. Negotiations had trained me to mask my reactions. I smiled. I'll have something prepared. After he left, I reviewed the documents more thoroughly. They were even more insidious than I'd first realized. A complete corporate coup disguised as routine governance. I placed them in my safe alongside the folder Judge Pierce had prepared. The next few days passed in a flurry of preparations. Caterers, florists and event staff transformed our mansion into a venue worthy of a society wedding. Vanessa directed it all with military precision, occasionally asking my opinion for appearances, but dismissing any actual input. The ice sculpture should be the Crosstech logo, I suggested during one such pretensive consultation. Oh, Benjamin, she laughed, patting my arm condescendingly. We're going. With Blake's initials. Much more appropriate for the occasion, don't you think? On the morning of the ceremony, I stood before the mirror in our bedroom, adjusting my tie. Not the navy Brioni Vanessa had suggested, but a charcoal Tom Ford that had been Eleanor's last gift to me. In the reflection, I could see the life I'd built and the vultures circling it. Vanessa appeared behind me, resplendent, in a designer dress that cost more than most people's monthly salary. Ready to celebrate our son's big day? She asked, emphasizing our in a way that felt more possessive than inclusive. Blake isn't my son, I reminded her quietly. But yes, I'm ready. Her smile tightened. After all these years, I'd hoped you'd consider him family. I turned to face her directly. Family doesn't plot against family, Vanessa. For a moment, uncertainty flickered across her perfect features. Then she laughed, a practiced, melodious sound. Plot. Darling, you've been working too hard. We only want what's best for you, for all of us. As our car pulled up to the Riverside Grand, I sent a final text to Judge Pierce, proceeding as planned. His response was immediate. Understood. I'll be there. Alatai. Graduation ceremony itself was predictably pompous. Speeches about future leadership, innovation, and passing torches to new generations. Blake received special recognition from the dean, who pointedly acknowledged the business dynasty he represents. Throughout it all, I applauded at appropriate moments, maintained a dignified smile, and kept my eyes on the larger game being played. This wasn't the end they imagined, but the beginning I had orchestrated. As we prepared to leave for our mansion and the celebratory party, I caught Vanessa whispering to Blake, "Everything's ready. By midnight, Crosstech will have its new leader." I followed them silently, knowing that midnight would indeed bring change, just not the one they anticipated. The chandeliers in our ballroom cast a golden glow. Over the 200 guests who had come to celebrate Blake's graduation, crystal glasses clinked, expensive perfume hung in the air, and the murmur of New York's business elite created a constant backdrop of privileged conversation. I stood near the grand staircase, nursing a single malt and observing the spectacle Vanessa had orchestrated. "Benjamin," called Marcus, my CFO, approaching with 2 board members. Quite the celebration. Blake must be proud. Blake has much to be proud of, I responded carefully, noting how they glanced past me, scanning the room for my stepson. "We were just discussing the upcoming quarter," said Patricia Winters, our longest-serving board member. "Blake mentioned some strategic repositioning." I met her gaze directly. "Did he? Interesting, considering. Any strategic repositioning would require CEO and board approval." An awkward silence fell before Marcus laughed too loudly. Of course, just preliminary discussions." They drifted away, and I watched them immediately seek out Blake, who stood holding court near the center of the room. My stepson had positioned himself perfectly, accessible to everyone who mattered, Vanessa at his side, like a queen regent preparing to transfer power. Caroline, my assistant of 15 years, appeared at my elbow. "They've been doing this for months," she said quietly. "Meetings scheduled when you're traveling, confidential documents copied, board members invited to private dinners." "I know," I replied, meeting her concerned gaze. "Thank you for your loyalty." She hesitated, then added, "Whatever happens tonight, I want you to know it's been an honor working with you, Mr. Cross." Before I could respond, the room's attention shifted as Vanessa tapped a silver spoon against her champagne flute. The crowd quieted, turning toward her and Blake, who stood on the third step of the grand staircase, physically elevated above everyone else. "Friends, colleagues, distinguished guests," Vanessa began, her voice carrying effortlessly. "Tonight we celebrate not just Blake's academic achievement, but a new chapter for cross-tech industries." She continued with practiced charm, weaving a narrative that subtly positioned Blake as the natural successor, the future of the company, while painting me as a relic of the past, respected but obsolete. Throughout her speech, she never once looked in my direction. "And now," she concluded, "I believe Benjamin would like to say a few words." The expectant silence that followed confirmed what I'd suspected. They anticipated my retirement announcement. Vanessa's eyes finally found mine, gleaming with triumph, as I made my way to the staircase. I took my position surveying the room. Business partners who'd known me for decades, employees whose careers I'd fostered, social climbers who'd attached themselves to my success, and among them, Judge Nathaniel Pierce, standing quietly near the entrance, the sealed folder tucked under his arm. 27 years ago, I began, I founded Crosstech with a simple belief that innovation shouldn't be limited by convention. Today, that principle guides everything we do. I paused, noting Blake's impatient expression, the way he glanced at his watch. I've watched this company grow from a small office with 3 employees to an industry leader with global impact. Through economic downturns, technological revolutions, and personal challenges, one thing has remained constant: my commitment to Crosstech's vision and values. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. This clearly wasn't the speech they'd expected. Recently, I've become aware of alternative visions for Crosstech's future, visions that prioritize short-term gains over long-term innovation, visions that would dismantle what we've built in favor of quick profits and personal advancement. Vanessa's smile froze. Blake shifted uncomfortably. I've also become aware of efforts to force my retirement, to take what isn't freely given, to claim credit for achievements not earned. The room fell completely silent now. I could see board members exchanging glances, partners leaning forward. But tonight isn't about those disappointing revelations. Tonight is about Crosstech's true future, which remains exactly where it's always been, in the hands of those who built it. I nodded toward the entrance. "Judge Pierce, would you join me, please?" The crowd parted as Nathaniel made his way forward. Blake's confident expression had vanished, replaced by confusion. Vanessa gripped the banister, her knuckles white against the polished wood. "Many of you know Judge Nathaniel Pierce, not just as a respected member of our judiciary, but as the legal architect who helped establish Crosstech's founding documents. What you may not know is that he's also the executor of my estate and the custodian of certain contingency plans." Judge Pierce stood beside me now, his presence lending gravity to the moment. "Judge, would you please inform the gathering about the ownership structure of Crosstech Industries?" Nathaniel cleared his throat. Crosstech Industries remains 87% owned by Benjamin Cross personally, with 10% distributed among employee stock options and 3% held by minor shareholders. No transfer of controlling interest has occurred or been approved by the board of directors. Whispers erupted around the room. I could see Marcus backing away from Blake. Patricia Winter's expression hardening into professional concern. Furthermore, Nathaniel continued, the Cross Residence Trust, which holds title to this property and several others, remains solely under Mr. Cross's control, with specific provisions regarding occupancy and use. Vanessa stepped forward. Benjamin, what is this? We can discuss company matters privately. As we have been? I countered. Like the private discussions you've been having with board members, or perhaps like the private alterations to corporate documents that were presented for my signature. I turned back to the crowd. For those wondering about the documents circulated among certain board members, they were never signed, never filed, and never valid. Blake finally found his voice. This is ridiculous. You're making yourself look foolish, old man. Mum, let's just... That's quite enough, Judge Pierce interrupted, his judicial authority silencing Blake. Instantly, Mr. Cross has prepared a statement of facts regarding recent activities at Crosstech Industries, backed by substantial documentation. He opened the folder, removing a bound document. This includes evidence of unauthorized meetings, misrepresentation to shareholders, attempted corporate espionage, and potential breach of fiduciary duty by several individuals in this room. The atmosphere had transformed from celebration to crisis in minutes. I watched as realization dawned across the faces of guests. They had been invited not to witness my retirement, but to witness something entirely different. I have no intention of embarrassing anyone publicly, I said. This isn't about revenge or humiliation, it's about truth and consequences. Vanessa moved closer, her public composure cracking. Benjamin, please. 3 years, I said, my voice low but carrying in the silent room. 3 years of plotting, manipulating, and undermining. 3 years of being mocked in my own home, dismissed in my own company. Did you really think I wouldn't notice? Blake stepped down, attempting to salvage the situation. Everyone, please enjoy the evening. My father is clearly... I'm not your father, I stated firmly. And as of this moment, you are no longer employed by Crosstech Industries. The gasps were audible. Judge Pierce handed me another document from his folder. This termination is effective immediately, citing cause, specifically documented attempts to manipulate corporate governance and misrepresent authority to business partners. I turned to face the crowd. Again. I founded Crosstech on integrity and innovation. Those values haven't changed, and neither has my commitment to this company's future. To that end, I'm announcing not my retirement, but a reorganization that will strengthen our core mission. For the next 5 minutes, I outlined my vision for Crosstech's future. New initiatives, leadership changes, strategic partnerships. Throughout, I maintained a calm, measured tone, the voice of a leader confident in his direction. As I concluded, Judge Pierce stepped forward again. There is one final matter to address. He produced a separate document. This concerns the residential property where we currently stand. Vanessa's face had gone completely pale. Under the terms of the Cross Residence Trust, Pierce continued, occupancy is contingent upon specific conditions, including good faith behavior toward the Trust's founder. He looked directly at Vanessa now. Based on documented violations of these conditions, occupancy rights are hereby revoked for Vanessa Hadley Cross and Blake Hadley, effective tomorrow at noon. The silence was absolute. 200 of New York's elite stood frozen, witnessing the collapse of a carefully constructed facade. I'll be staying at the plaza tonight, I announced, my voice even. Caroline will coordinate the transition of my personal items tomorrow. Vanessa, Blake, you have until noon to gather your essentials. Your attorneys can coordinate the retrieval of remaining personal property next week. With that, I descended the stairs, nodding to several stunned executives as I passed. Judge Pierce followed, the folder tucked securely under his arm. As we reached the entrance, I heard Vanessa's voice, shrill and desperate. Benjamin, you can't do this. I paused, turning back to face the room one last time. I already have. The plaza's royal suite offered a panoramic view of Central Park, the city lights twinkling against the darkness. I stood at the window, tie loosened, watching New York continue its ceaseless rhythm. My phone had been buzzing continuously since I'd left the mansion, board members, business associates, and a particularly persistent stream of calls from Vanessa that I'd sent directly to voicemail. A knock at the door announced Judge Pierce, who had accompanied me to ensure the legal documents were properly served before joining me for a nightcap. That, he said, settling into an armchair with his scotch, was either the most dignified response to betrayal I've ever witnessed or the most coldly calculated countermove in New York business history. I smiled faintly. Perhaps both. You realize they'll fight this. Vanessa will claim emotional distress, alienation, public humiliation. Let her, I replied, taking the seat across from him. Everything was documented, everything was legal. The prenuptial agreement specifically addressed company ownership and property rights. Nathaniel studied me over his glass. It's not the legal battle I'm concerned about. It's the personal cost, Ben. That was your home for 10 years. That was your wife. I took a long sip of scotch, feeling the warmth spread through my chest. Was it? The house, yes, but Vanessa. I shook my head. I'm not sure she was ever truly my wife. A partner would have supported my vision, not plotted to dismantle it. My phone buzzed again. Caroline, this time. I answered. Mr. Cross, I thought you should know. Blake and Mrs. Cross are removing items from your home office, artwork, files. Document everything, I instructed. Security cameras. Should be recording. Don't interfere unless they attempt to access the safe. After hanging up, I caught Nathaniel's concerned expression. You predicted this, he noted. People show you who they are in crisis, I replied. They're panicking, grabbing what they can. By morning, they'll have lawyers advising them to be more strategic. Throughout the night, reports continued to filter in. Board. Members were choosing sides. Partners were requesting clarification. Employees were uncertain about the company's future. I addressed each issue methodically, the skills honed through decades of crisis management serving me well. By dawn, exhaustion had set in, but so had a strange sense of peace. I ordered breakfast and watched the sunrise over Central Park, its golden light gradually illuminating the city I loved. At precisely noon, Caroline called to confirm that Vanessa and Blake had vacated the mansion, accompanied by Vanessa's attorney, a shark named Lawrence Hoffman, whom I'd encountered in previous corporate disputes. They've taken mostly personal items, Caroline reported. Security prevented them from removing artwork and documents from your office. Mr. Hoffman indicated you'll be receiving communication from him shortly. I expected nothing less, I replied. Is the house secure now? Yes, sir. I've had the locks changed as instructed, and security will remain on site for the next 72 hours. After thanking her, I prepared to return to my home, a home that would feel both emptier and more peaceful without Vanessa's calculating presence. The mansion seemed larger somehow as I walked through the front door that afternoon. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, highlighting empty spaces where Vanessa's decorative touches had been hastily removed. A painting missing here, a vase gone there. Physical reminders of the excision that had occurred. In my office, evidence of their desperate search was clear. Drawers not fully closed, books askew on shelves. The safe remained untouched. They knew better than to attempt that violation. On my desk sat a formal letter from Lawrence Hoffman, requesting an immediate meeting to discuss equitable distribution and corporate governance. I set it aside and moved to the window, gazing out at the garden Eleanor had designed 15 years ago. Her roses still bloomed, tended now by gardeners who'd never known her. In that moment, I felt her presence more strongly than I had in years, not as a ghost, but as a reminder of what genuine partnership had felt like. My phone rang. Marcus, my CFO, whose loyalty had wavered visibly during last night's revelations. Benjamin, he began, his tone professionally neutral. I think we need to discuss the way forward. Indeed we do, I replied. I'll be in the office tomorrow. Please schedule a full board meeting for 9 a.m. About last night, he continued, hesitant now. I want you to know that I never... Actions speak louder than explanations, Marcus. Tomorrow, everyone will have the opportunity to demonstrate where they stand. That's all I have to say for now. After hanging up, I spent the evening reviewing company documents, preparing for the inevitable corporate battle ahead. Vanessa and Blake had spent months cultivating allies within Crosstech. I would need to methodically address each compromise, each misrepresentation. The following morning, I arrived at Crosstech headquarters at 7 a.m., well before most employees. Caroline was already at her desk, efficiency personified. The board is confirmed for 9 a.m., she reported. Patricia... Winters requested a private meeting beforehand. Denied, I replied. Everyone gets the same information at the same time. The hours before the meeting passed in focused preparation. By 8:55, I stood in the boardroom, watching as directors filed in one by one. Some met my eyes directly, others studied their tablets with sudden fascination. Patricia Winters entered last, her usual confidence notably diminished. At precisely 9 a.m., I called the meeting to order. Before we begin, I want to address the events of the past 36 hours directly. Last night was not a spontaneous action, but a necessary response to a coordinated attempt to force my removal as CEO and take control of Crosstech through improper means. I placed a thick binder on the table. This contains documentation of unauthorized meetings, misleading statements to partners, and attempts to manipulate corporate governance documents. Each of you will receive a copy for review. Marcus shifted uncomfortably. Benjamin? Perhaps a more private? Transparency begins now, I interrupted. Crosstech was built on integrity. We will either restore that foundation or rebuild on its ruins. For the next hour, I methodically outlined what I knew, who had been involved, and the consequences for those actions. Some board members appeared genuinely shocked. Others showed the discomfort of the court. Moving forward, I concluded, I am implementing a corporate restructuring effective immediately. Details are in the folders before you. Patricia finally spoke. And what of Vanessa and Blake's assertions? About your capacity to lead? The concerns about your age affecting decision-making? I met her gaze steadily. My age has given me experience, perspective, and the wisdom to recognize betrayal before it succeeds. If anyone doubts my capacity, today's meeting should clarify the matter. By meeting's end, 3 board members had submitted resignations. 2 others had pledged renewed commitment. The remaining members sat in stunned silence, processing the new reality of Crosstech under Benjamin Cross. Not a fading patriarch, but a leader reminding everyone why he had built a $75 million company in the first place. As the room cleared, Caroline appeared with an update. Lawrence Hoffman has scheduled a meeting for tomorrow. Also, there's a Ms. Eleanor Pierce asking to see you, she says. She's Judge Pierce's daughter. I smiled for the first time that day. Send her in. Eleanor Pierce, named after my late wife at Nathaniel's insistence, was a brilliant corporate attorney I'd watched grow from a precocious child into a formidable legal mind. Uncle Ben, she said, entering my office with purposeful strides. Dad told me what happened. I'd like to represent you in the divorce. Proceedings. I gestured to the chair across from my desk. Your father might consider that a conflict of interest. She set her briefcase down firmly. Dad suggested it. He says you need someone who understands what's at stake beyond the money. As she outlined her strategy, I felt something I hadn't expected amid the corporate warfare and personal betrayal. Hope. Not just for legal victory, but for rebuilding with integrity. That night, returning to the mansion that was once again truly mine, I stood in the entrance hall and felt the weight of the past 48 hours. The house was quiet, emptied of Vanessa's calculating presence and Blake's entitlement. Tomorrow would bring lawyers, negotiations, and the continued work of reclaiming Crosstech. But tonight, for the first time in years, I could breathe freely in my own home. I poured a glass of Eleanor's favorite wine and raised it in silent toast to the empty room. To beginnings disguised as endings, I whispered. The following weeks unfolded like a complex chess match. Lawrence Hoffman, representing Vanessa, opened with an aggressive gambit, a demand for 50% of Crosstech shares, the mansion, and 3 other properties, plus $12 million in compensation for emotional distress. The legal document, thick with threatening language and moral indignation, sat on my desk like a declaration of war. Eleanor Pierce read it and smiled, the confident smile of a predator recognizing overreach. They're hoping you'll settle to avoid public scrutiny, she said, setting the document aside. Classic intimidation strategy. And our response? I asked, though I already knew the answer. We give them nothing they don't legally deserve. The prenuptial is ironclad. We have documentation of their attempts to undermine your position. We counter with exactly what the prenuptial stipulates, which is considerably less than they're demanding. Our counteroffer was delivered the next day. Vanessa would receive the divorce. Settlement outlined in our prenuptial agreement, $1.5 million her personal belongings, and the vacation property in the Hamptons that had always been more her taste than mine. Hoffman called Eleanor within hours. his outrage almost theatrical. "This is insulting. After 10 years of marriage, my client built his social connections, hosted his business events, supported his public image." Eleanor's response was measured. "Your client signed a prenuptial agreement with full legal counsel. That agreement specifically addresses divorce settlements and company ownership. Additionally, we have substantial evidence of her attempts to seize control of Crosstech through improper means. We're being quite generous under the circumstances." The legal battle quickly became a war of attrition. Vanessa's team leaked stories to the business press, suggesting my mental decline, my obsessive control, my inability to accept the next generation of leadership. Blake gave interviews portraying himself as the innovative heir apparent, cruelly cast aside by a jealous stepfather. I maintained silence publicly, focusing instead on stabilizing Crosstech. The board reorganization was complete. 3 new members with impeccable credentials replaced those who had resigned. Marcus, after a frank discussion about his wavering loyalty, remained as CFO, but with adjusted responsibilities and clear performance metrics. "They're trying to draw you into a public spectacle," Eleanor advised during one of our daily strategy sessions. "Every interview they give is designed to provoke a response." "Let them talk," I replied. "Actions speak louder," and act I did. Over the next month, I personally called our 20 largest clients, visited our major facilities, and held town halls with employees. I launched the innovation initiative I'd been developing for years, a significant expansion of our renewable energy technologies that would position Crosstech at the forefront of the industry for the next decade. The market responded. Our stock rose 12% in 3 weeks. Industry analysts noted the renewed vigor at Crosstech. One financial publication ran a profile titled "Benjamin Cross, the Renaissance of a Tech Visionary." Meanwhile, the mansion slowly transformed. I hired an interior designer to remove the last traces of Vanessa's cold elegance, replacing it with warm woods, comfortable furnishings and artwork that reflected my personal taste rather than social aspirations. Eleanor often joined me for dinner, bringing case updates along with her vibrant energy. "Hoffman called again," she announced one evening over pasta in the newly redesigned kitchen. "They've lowered their demands to 30% of Crosstech and $8 million. I twirled spaghetti around my fork. "Still, nowhere near the prenuptial terms." "No," she agreed, "but they're getting desperate." Blake's interview with tech innovator backfired spectacularly when he couldn't explain the basic principles behind our new energy storage system. I smiled despite myself. Blake had always been more concerned with appearing knowledgeable than actually becoming so, a fatal flaw in an industry built on substance. "What's our next move?" I asked. Eleanor set down her fork, her expression turning serious. "They've requested a face-to-face meeting. Vanessa, Blake, their legal team, and you with yours." I considered this development. They want to see if they can manipulate me in person, use the personal connection. Precisely, I've advised against it, but ultimately, it's your decision. I gazed around the kitchen, once Vanessa's showpiece, now a warm, functional space where I actually enjoyed spending time. "Schedule it. At our offices, not theirs. I want them on my territory." The meeting was set for the following Tuesday. I spent the weekend reviewing our position, preparing mentally for the inevitable emotional manipulation. On Monday, I received an unexpected visitor at my office, Patricia Winters, who had resigned from the board during the restructuring. "Benjamin," she began, clearly uncomfortable, "I owe you an explanation." I gestured for her to sit. "I'm listening." "Vanessa approached me 6 months ago. She said you were planning to step down, that you'd discussed transitioning leadership to Blake with her privately. She was very convincing, talked about your health concerns, your desire for a legacy plan. And you believed her without confirming with me directly?" Patricia looked down. She had documents, emails that appeared to be from you, meeting notes. By the time I realized something wasn't right, I was already implicated in their planning. I studied her, a woman I'd respected for years, now clearly distressed by her role in the attempted coup. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because they're still doing it," she replied, meeting my eyes directly. "Vanessa contacted me last week, offering a position at a new venture Blake is supposedly launching. She implied they have investors ready to back a competitor to Crosstech, built around the team they've been cultivating. This was new information and potentially concerning. Do you have details?" "Nothing concrete. Just suggestions about taking Crosstech's client list and leveraging insider knowledge." After Patricia left, I called Eleanor immediately. We may have a new problem. Tuesday morning arrived crisp and clear. I selected my clothing carefully, not the power suits Vanessa had always insisted upon, but a more comfortable, equally expensive ensemble that reflected my personal style. I arrived at Crosstech headquarters early, reviewing documents with Eleanor in the conference room we'd selected for the confrontation. At precisely 10 a.m., Vanessa entered, flanked by Lawrence Hoffman and 2 junior attorneys. Blake followed, attempting to project confidence but betrayed by the tension in his shoulders. Vanessa had chosen her outfit strategically, subdued elegance that suggested both victimhood and dignity. Her eyes, however, remained calculating as she scanned the room, noting the changes I'd implemented in the executive floor. Benjamin, she nodded, taking the seat directly across from me. Vanessa, I replied evenly. Blake, Mr. Hoffman. Hoffman immediately launched into a practiced speech about amicable resolution and fair consideration of contributions to the marriage and company. As he spoke, Vanessa watched me intently, looking for signs of weakness or sentimentality. When Hoffman finished, Eleanor responded with a precise summary of our position, highlighting the prenuptial agreement, the documented evidence of corporate sabotage, and our generous offer that exceeded the prenuptial requirements. This is absurd, Blake interjected, unable to contain himself. You built this company using Mom's connections, her social standing. Blake, Hoffman cautioned, but the young man continued. You were nothing but a tech nerd with an idea before she gave you credibility in New York society. She made you who you are. I let the outburst hang in the air for a moment before responding. Crosstech was valued at $38 million when I met your mother. My idea had already transformed into a successful company with over 200 employees and clients in 17 countries. Vanessa leaned forward, deploying the softer approach I'd anticipated. Benjamin, we had 10 years together. Whatever you believe happened, surely that counts for something. We built a life, shared a home. While you plotted to take my company, I finished for her. While you mocked me as too old to matter. While you instructed your son that he would soon control what I spent decades building. Her expression hardened, the pretense of wounded affection vanishing. You were planning to die with your hands still on the controls. Someone needed to think about succession, and naturally the only possible successor was your son with no relevant experience or demonstrated competence. Blake flushed angrily, but Hoffman intervened before he could respond. This recrimination isn't productive. We're here to negotiate a settlement. Eleanor smiled pleasantly. We've provided our offer. It exceeds the prenuptial requirements while acknowledging the reality of the situation. The reality, Vanessa said coldly, is that I have evidence of Benjamin's cognitive decline, medical evaluations suggesting early dementia, witnessed episodes of confusion, fabricated, Eleanor cut in, and making such false claims publicly would constitute defamation. We're also prepared to discuss your new venture, I added calmly. This caught them off guard. Blake's eyes widened slightly. Hoffman looked confused. New venture, he repeated. The competitor to Crosstech you're attempting to establish using our client list and proprietary information, the one you're recruiting my former board members to join. The momentary flicker in Vanessa's eyes confirmed Patricia's information. Hoffman recovered quickly. My clients have every right to pursue new business opportunities. Non-compete clauses only apply to employees, which neither Mrs. Cross nor her son currently are. True, Eleanor agreed. However, intellectual property theft, corporate espionage, and tortious interference with business relationships apply regardless of employment status. I leaned forward slightly. Here's my final offer. Vanessa receives exactly what the prenuptial agreement stipulates. Blake receives nothing, as he has no legal standing in our marriage dissolution. Both signed comprehensive NDAs regarding Crosstech's operations, clients, and technologies. In exchange, Crosstech will not pursue legal action regarding your attempted corporate takeover or your current efforts to establish a competing business using stolen intellectual property. The silence that followed was heavy with tension. Vanessa's composed facade cracked slightly, revealing the fury beneath. Blake looked to Hoffman for guidance, clearly out of his depth. We'll need to confer privately, Hoffman finally said. Of course, I replied. We'll give you the room. As Eleanor and I stepped outside, she whispered, They're cornered. The mention of the competing business rattled them. 30 minutes later, we were called back in. Hoffman's expression was professionally neutral, but Vanessa's cold anger and Blake's sullen resentment told the real story. "We accept your terms," Hoffman stated, "with the additional provision that Mrs. Cross's personal contributions to Crosstech's social standing be acknowledged in the settlement documentation." It was a face-saving measure, nothing more. I nodded. Acceptable. Documents were produced, signatures applied. Throughout the process, Vanessa maintained rigid composure, while Blake alternated between glaring at me and studying the papers as if they might suddenly reveal a hidden advantage. When it was done, Vanessa stood. "I hope your empire keeps you warm at night, Benjamin." I met her gaze calmly. "It's not about the empire, Vanessa. It's about the integrity you never understood." As they departed, I felt no triumph, no vindication, only a profound relief that this chapter was closing, and the quiet certainty that I had preserved what mattered most, my life's work and my self-respect. The legal battle ended with a whimper rather than the bang Vanessa had anticipated. The settlement was finalized within weeks, the documents sealed at my request, not to protect myself, but to limit the public spectacle that had already caused enough disruption to Crosstech's operations. Vanessa took possession of the Hamptons property and her $1.5 million settlement, then promptly departed for Europe, according to Eleanor's sources. Blake proved less willing to accept defeat. He made several attempts to contact board members and key executives, offering vague opportunities and thinly veiled threats. When these approaches failed, he turned to social media, posting thinly disguised references to dinosaur tech companies and innovators held back by outdated leadership. I ignored these juvenile tactics, focusing instead on Crosstech's future. The innovation initiative I'd launched was gaining momentum, attracting top talent and generating industry buzz. Our stock continued its upward trajectory, vindication in the form of market confidence. One Tuesday morning, Caroline appeared in my office doorway with an unusual expression, somewhere between concern and amusement. "Sir, there's a woman here to see you. She doesn't have an appointment, but she's rather insistent." "Did she give a name?" I asked, reviewing the quarterly projections on my screen. "Margaret Ellison." My fingers froze. Above the keyboard, Margaret Ellison, Eleanor's maiden name before she married and became Eleanor Cross, a name I hadn't heard spoken in 15 years. "Send her in," I said, closing my laptop. The woman who entered moved with the confident grace I remembered, though her auburn hair now held strands of silver, and fine lines marked the passage of time around her eyes. At 61, Margaret Ellison remained striking, not with Vanessa's calculated perfection, but with the natural elegance of a woman comfortable in her skin. "Benjamin," she said, her voice bringing back memories of faculty meetings and heated debates. "You're looking well." "Margaret," I replied, rising from my desk. "This is unexpected." She smiled, the same smile that had first caught my attention at MIT 3, decades ago, when we were both young professors with ambitious ideas. "I imagined it would be. May I sit?" I gestured to the chair across from my desk, studying the woman who had been my first wife, my intellectual partner, and my co-founder of the technology that eventually became Crosstech's cornerstone. "I've been following your recent situation," she said, settling into the chair. "It's made quite the splash in academic circles as well as business ones." "I'm sure it has," I acknowledged, "though I've tried to keep the personal aspects private." Margaret nodded. "Always the dignified one. Some things don't change." She glanced around my office, taking in the awards, the prototypes displayed in glass cases, the view of Manhattan through the floor-to-ceiling windows. "Other things change considerably. This is quite different from our lab at MIT." I smiled despite myself. "Slightly better funded, at least." "I read about your renewable energy expansion. The integration of quantum computing with energy storage systems is brilliant. It reminds me of what we discussed at that cafe in Cambridge. What was it called?" "Pemberton's," I supplied, the memory surfacing effortlessly. "You drew the initial algorithm on a napkin, which you still have framed somewhere, I imagine." "In the archives downstairs, actually." A comfortable silence fell between us, the ease of two people who had once known each other completely, separated by years but connected by shared history. "Why are you here, Margaret?" I finally asked. She met my gaze directly. "2 reasons. First, to make sure you're all right. Not professionally. The business press makes it clear you've handled that aspect admirably. I mean personally. I know what it's like to have a spouse betray you. The reference to her second husband, the reason for our divorce, hung unspoken between us. I'm managing, I answered truthfully. The work helps. It always did, she nodded. And the second reason, I'm leading a research team at Columbia on quantum applications in climate technology. When I saw your announcement about Crosstech's new direction, I thought there might be potential for collaboration. She reached into her bag, producing a slim folder. This is a summary of our current project. It dovetails remarkably well with what you've announced publicly. Perhaps there's room for academic-corporate partnership. I accepted the folder, our fingers briefly touching in the exchange. I'll review it. Though I should warn you, Crosstech has become particularly cautious about partnerships recently. Margaret's laugh was genuine. I'd be disappointed if you weren't, but unlike your ex-wife, I actually understand the technology I'm proposing to work with. After she left, I sat. With the proposal and memories both. Margaret and I had parted professionally after our divorce, her staying in academia, while I built Crosstech from our shared foundational research. We'd maintained cordial distance, acknowledging each other's accomplishments from afar. Now reviewing her team's work, I recognized the same brilliant insights that had first drawn me to her intellectually. The proposed collaboration made perfect sense technologically. The personal complications, those were another matter entirely. That evening, I mentioned Margaret's visit to Eleanor over our now regular Tuesday dinner at the mansion. Margaret Ellison approached you about a collaboration? Eleanor repeated, her legal mind immediately assessing implications. Is that wise, given your history? Technologically, it's sound, I replied. Her team's work complements our initiative perfectly. Eleanor studied me thoughtfully, and personally. It's been 15 years, Eleanor. We've both built separate lives. Lives that might now intersect again, she observed. Just be careful, Ben. You're still recovering from one personal earthquake. I appreciated her concern, but found myself unexpectedly defensive. Margaret isn't Vanessa. She never was. When we were married, our problems stemmed from her infidelity, not manipulation or greed. Fair point, Eleanor conceded. Just promise me you'll approach this with the same due diligence you'd apply to any other partnership. I promised, though privately I wondered if any partnership could ever be evaluated with complete objectivity when human emotions were involved. The following week brought another unexpected development. Caroline appeared at my office door, her expression troubled. Mr. Cross, Blake Hadley is here. He's asked to speak with you privately. My initial instinct was to refuse, but curiosity won out. Send him in, but stay close to the intercom. Blake entered with none of his usual swagger. His designer clothes looked slept in, his eyes shadowed with fatigue. Benjamin, he said, his voice lacking its customary arrogance. Thank you for seeing me. What can I do for you, Blake? I asked, not offering him a seat. He ran a hand through his disheveled hair. I need advice. Advice, I repeated skeptically. About what? The investors who backed Mom's plan to take over Crosstech. They've turned on us. They fronted significant capital for what they thought would be an easy acquisition. Now they're demanding repayment with terms we can't possibly meet. I leaned back in my chair, studying my former stepson. And this concerns me because they're threatening us, he said, his voice cracking slightly. Not just legally. These aren't conventional investors. Benjamin, they're connected. Dangerous. Mom's gone to ground in Switzerland, but they've made it clear they can find her. And me. I maintained my composed exterior, but internally, alarm bells were ringing. Vanessa had always been drawn to powerful connections, often without thoroughly vetting their backgrounds. What exactly are you asking of me, Blake? He met my eyes directly for perhaps the first time in our troubled relationship. Help, protection, guidance. I know I have no right to ask after everything, but you're the only person I know who might be able to handle this situation. I considered him carefully. The young man before me had participated in attempting to destroy my life's work, had mocked me as obsolete, had coveted what he hadn't earned. Yet there was something in his current vulnerability that reminded me he was in many ways a product of Vanessa's influence rather than its architect. Tell me everything, I said finally. Names, amounts, threats made, every detail. For the next hour, Blake outlined a troubling picture. Vanessa had secured backing from several investors with questionable backgrounds, promising them significant returns when they acquired Crosstech. With the failure of that plan and the meager settlement, they were now demanding repayment of nearly $7 million with exorbitant interest. When he finished, I remained silent for a long moment. Why did you come to me with this? Why not go to the authorities? These people have connections everywhere and... He hesitated. Despite everything, you're the most ethical person I... No. You fought fair even when we didn't. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'll need to verify this information. If it checks out, I'll consider how to proceed. That's all I can promise for now. Relief washed over his face. Thank you. That's more than I deserve. After he left, I immediately contacted Judge Pierce, outlining the situation without mentioning names. Nathaniel's response was grim. Confirmation. If these are the people I think they are, this is deadly serious, Ben. Your ex-wife may have entangled herself with a very dangerous organization. That night, alone in the mansion that had once echoed with Vanessa's cold laughter, I faced a profound moral dilemma. The woman who had plotted my downfall and the young man who had eagerly anticipated my professional death now faced genuine danger. Danger I had the resources to potentially address. The easiest path would be to do nothing. Let natural consequences unfold. Let Vanessa and Blake face the results of their own poor decisions. Few would blame me for such a choice. Yet as I stood looking out over the garden Eleanor had designed, I knew I couldn't take that path. Not because Vanessa and Blake deserved protection, but because I refused to let their moral failures determine mine. The next morning I called Eleanor Pierce. I need your help with a delicate situation. The world had shifted beneath my feet once again, but this time I stood on bedrock rather than quicksand. 3 days after Blake's desperate visit, I convened a meeting in my home office, a careful assembly of trusted individuals. Eleanor A. Pierce as my legal counsel, Judge Nathaniel Pierce with his judicial connections, Margaret Ellison, whose analytical mind I'd always respected, and reluctantly Blake himself. I've verified your claims, I began, addressing Blake directly. The individuals backing Vanessa's takeover attempt are indeed connected to organized crime, specifically the Kazan network, which uses business investments to launder money from their less legitimate enterprises. Blake paled visibly. Then you believe me. I believe you're in genuine danger, I clarified. Whether you fully understood who you were dealing with initially is another matter. Eleanor spread several documents across my desk. We've traced the financial connections. Vanessa established 3 shell companies to manage the investments, all leading back to Kazan subsidiaries. Classic money laundering structure. The $7 million they fronted came with expectations of controlling a $75 million company, Judge Pierce added. Now they want their investment back with substantial interest, or equivalent compensation. Blake swallowed hard. Mom thought she had guaranteed success. These people don't accept failure. I studied the young man who had once smirked at my supposed irrelevance. Fear had stripped away his arrogance, revealing something I hadn't seen before, a glimpse of potential beneath the entitlement. We have 3 priorities, I stated. First, ensuring physical safety. Second, addressing the financial threat legally. Third, permanent resolution. Margaret, who had been silently analyzing the financial documentation, looked up. The shell companies have a structural weakness. Their connection to legitimate businesses requires maintaining certain legal fictions. If those fictions were challenged simultaneously in multiple jurisdictions, we could freeze their assets while exposing the money laundering operation, Eleanor finished, a gleam of understanding in her eyes. But we'd need significant resources and coordination. Resources I have, I said. Coordination we can build. Over the next week, a careful plan took shape. Blake contacted Vanessa in Switzerland, convincing her to return secretly to New York. My security team ensured both were housed safely in a property unknown to their pursuers. Meanwhile, Eleanor assembled a legal strike force, preparing to file simultaneous actions in 7 jurisdictions. The most delicate component involved law enforcement. Judge Pierce leveraged trusted contacts in the FBI's Financial Crimes Division, arranging a confidential meeting at a secure location. This is a risk, Eleanor warned as we prepared for that meeting. Once we involve federal authorities, we lose control of the narrative. Your connection to Vanessa could be exposed. Crosstech could face scrutiny. Some risks are worth taking, I replied. Not for Vanessa's sake, but because it's the right thing to do. The FBI meeting proved surprisingly productive. Agent Carlson, a veteran financial crimes investigator, had been tracking the Kazan network for years. "You're offering us a direct line into their operations," she said, reviewing our documentation. "This could potentially dismantle a significant portion of their money laundering infrastructure." "In exchange for immunity for Vanessa and Blake," I clarified. Agent Carlson's expression remained neutral. "We can't promise complete immunity, but cooperation is always considered favorably. They'll need to provide complete testimony." The plan moved forward with precision that would have made any corporate merger seem chaotic by comparison. Legal filings were prepared in absolute secrecy. FBI teams assembled evidence. Margaret's analytical insights proved invaluable, identifying connections even the federal investigators had missed. Throughout these tense days, I observed Blake with cautious interest. The young man who had once lounged entitled in my boardroom now worked tirelessly, providing details, reviewing documents, facing his mother's fury when she realized full disclosure was necessary. "You're different than I expected," he admitted one late night as we reviewed documentation in my study. "Different than your mother described, you mean?" I replied, not looking up from my computer. "Yes," he acknowledged. "She always portrayed you as rigid, cold, obsessed with control." I met his eyes then. "And what do you see now?" He considered the question seriously. "Someone principled. You could have left us to face these people alone. No one would have blamed you." "I would have blamed me," I said simply. 2 days later, everything was in place. The legal filings would occur simultaneously at 9 a.m. Eastern Time, coordinated with FBI operations in 4 cities. Vanessa and Blake would provide formal statements under protection at the federal building downtown. The night before this coordinated strike, I found myself alone in my garden, contemplating the strange turns my life had taken. The roses Eleanor had planted 15 years earlier bloomed in the moonlight, their fragrance carrying memories of simpler times. "Penny for your thoughts." I turned to find Margaret approaching along the stone path, a shawl wrapped around her shoulders against the evening chill. "Expensive thoughts tonight," I replied. "I'm not sure they're worth even a penny." She smiled, coming to stand beside me. "Second thoughts about helping them?" "No," I said honestly. "Just reflection on choices, consequences, the strange circles life draws." "The young man," Margaret observed. "He's not what you described initially." "No," I agreed. "He's not. There's potential there, buried under years of his mother's influence. People can surprise you," she said softly. "Sometimes they can even change." We stood in comfortable silence, the moonlight silvering the garden. Margaret's presence beside me felt right somehow, a connection to my authentic self that Vanessa had never understood or valued. "Whatever happens tomorrow," she said finally, "you've acted with integrity. That matters." Morning arrived with the crisp clarity of autumn. At precisely 9 a.m., as planned, legal filings hit courthouses in 7 jurisdictions. FBI teams moved simultaneously against key Kazan operations. Vanessa and Blake entered the federal building under armed escort. I monitored events from Crosstech headquarters, receiving updates from Eleanor, who accompanied Vanessa and Blake, and from Judge Pierce, who tracked the legal filings. By noon, the first results were flowing in. Assets frozen, arrests made, the Kazan network's financial infrastructure crumbling under coordinated assault. At 2 p.m., Eleanor called. "It's done. Vanessa and Blake have provided complete statements. The FBI is satisfied with their cooperation. They'll likely face minimal charges, possibly just financial penalties. And the threat? Substantially neutralized. The organization's leadership has bigger problems now than pursuing your ex-wife and stepson." Relief washed through me, not for Vanessa, whose calculating nature had nearly destroyed everything I'd built, but for the resolution of a dangerous situation that could have ended tragically. That evening, as the dust began to settle, I received an unexpected visitor at the mansion. Blake stood on my doorstep, looking simultaneously exhausted and unburdened. "I wanted to thank you personally," he said as I led him into the study. "The FBI says we're clear of danger. They've arrested the principal figures in the high organization." "Good," I replied, pouring 2 glasses of scotch and offering him one. "What will you do now?" He accepted the drink, considering the amber liquid thoughtfully. "Start over, I suppose. Somewhere new." Learn to build something rather than expect to inherit it. He met my eyes directly. I've learned some hard lessons these past months. Most meaningful lessons are hard, I observed. Blake took a careful sip of his scotch. There's something I need to tell you. Something I should have said earlier. The board manipulations, the governance documents, the attempts to force you out, those weren't entirely Mom's idea. I waited, sensing his need to continue. I pushed for it, he admitted. Mom was content with the lifestyle, but I wanted cross-tech. I convinced her we could take control, that you were past your prime. The admission hung between us, raw and honest in a way nothing between us had ever been. Why tell me this now? I asked. Because you deserve to know the truth. And because, he hesitated, because I need to acknowledge it myself if I'm ever going to change. I studied the young man before me. Still Blake Hadley, still flawed and shaped by privilege, but showing glimmers of something I hadn't seen before. Accountability. What you did with the Kazan situation, he continued, helping us when you had every reason not to, it showed me a different kind of strength than I'd understood before. We talked for another hour. Not as stepfather and stepson, certainly not as friends, but as two men acknowledging difficult truths. When he left, I felt an unexpected lightness. Not forgiveness exactly, but the release that comes with closing a chapter properly, rather than leaving it unfinished. The following day brought the public announcements. Federal authorities had disrupted a major money laundering operation. Assets had been seized, arrests made. Crosstech was mentioned nowhere in the reports, nor were Vanessa and Blake. Eleanor's careful legal work had ensured our involvement remained confidential. That afternoon, I received a message from Vanessa, the first direct communication since our legal settlement. I won't thank you for what you did, as it doesn't erase the past, but I acknowledge it was unexpected. I'm leaving for Europe tomorrow. You won't hear from me again. No signature, no sentimentality, just final confirmation of a clean break. I deleted the message without replying. Some chapters needed no epilogue. That evening, I hosted a small dinner at the mansion. Eleanor and Judge Pierce, Caroline, who had stood by me through the corporate turmoil, and Margaret, whose collaboration with Crosstech was now moving forward officially. As we shared a meal in the dining room that had once been Vanessa's showcase for social climbing, I felt the mansion transforming into a home again, warm with genuine conversation and authentic connections. To new beginnings, Judge Pierce offered, raising his glass in toast. And to wisdom hardly earned, Margaret added, her eyes meeting mine with understanding that spanned decades. As the evening proceeded, I found myself watching these people who had stood beside me through crisis, not for what they could gain, but out of genuine loyalty and shared values. This, I realized, was the true wealth I'd built. Not Crosstech's market value or the mansion's grandeur, but relationships founded on mutual respect and integrity. Later, as Margaret and I walked in the garden under a canopy of stars, she asked the question I'd been considering myself. What now, Benjamin? Crosstech is secure, the threat is neutralized, your divorce is final. What does the next chapter look like? I considered the question carefully. Professionally, the Renewable Energy Initiative. It matters more than corporate politics ever did. Personally, I glanced at her profile in the moonlight. I think I'm ready to rediscover some connections I've neglected. She smiled, understanding my meaning. Connections have to be willing to be rediscovered. Are they? I asked simply. Margaret turned to face me fully. They might be. With appropriate due diligence, of course. Of course, I agreed, feeling a warmth that had nothing to do with the evening air. The Crosstech crisis had nearly destroyed everything I'd built. The betrayal had cut deeper than I'd acknowledged even to myself. Yet standing in the garden with Margaret, I recognized that sometimes what appears to be an ending is merely clearing ground for something more authentic to take root. 1 year passed, then another. The seasons changed, business evolved, and life settled into new rhythms that felt more authentic than any I'd known during my decade with Vanessa. Crosstech flourished. Under the Renewable Energy Initiative, our market valuation climbing to $110 million as innovation fueled growth. The collaboration with Margaret's research team at Columbia produced breakthroughs that industry analysts called transformative, not just commercially successful, but meaningful contributions to addressing climate challenges. Margaret and I rebuilt our connection carefully, first as professional collaborators, then as friends rediscovering shared interests, and eventually as partners in a relationship that honored our history while embracing our present selves. At 65 and 63 respectively, we approached this reconnection with the wisdom of experience and the freedom of second chances. Blake surprised me most of all. After leaving New York, he enrolled in an engineering program in California, finally applying his intelligence to meaningful learning rather than manipulation. Our relationship remained cautiously cordial, occasional messages exchanged about his studies or cross-text developments. Not family, but no longer adversaries. Vanessa remained in Europe, reportedly remarried to a Swiss financier. I wished her well from a distance, recognizing that our chapter had needed to close for both our sakes. On a crisp autumn morning, 3 years after the night Judge Pierce had arrived at Blake's graduation party with that fateful folder, I sat in my office at Crosstech, reviewing the structure of a significant transition. After decades at the helm, I had designed a careful succession plan, not out of age or inability, but from recognition that legacy requires thoughtful transition. Caroline entered with a stack of documents. "The board has unanimously approved the succession framework," she reported. "They're particularly pleased with the phased approach." 3 years is reasonable, I nodded. Time to mentor properly to ensure values transfer along with operational control. They've also approved the Crosstech Foundation Charter. She added, placing another document before me. Funding will begin next quarter as proposed. This represented my deepest vision, transforming 20% of Crosstech's annual profits into grants for renewable energy implementation in developing regions, educational initiatives, and climate innovation research. Not just building technology, but ensuring it served genuine human needs. Later, that day, I presented the complete transition plan to our executive team. Not Blake's hasty power grab, but a thoughtful evolution that preserved Crosstech's core while embracing necessary change. The succession committee has selected Dr. Aisha Johnson as CEO designate, I announced, indicating the brilliant engineer who had risen through our ranks over 15 years. Over the next 3 years, we'll work together to ensure seamless transition. I'll remain as chairman of the board and foundation director afterward. Aisha, whose innovations had been central to our renewable energy breakthroughs, spoke eloquently about honoring Crosstech's founding vision while pushing boundaries. Unlike Blake's entitled expectation of leadership, she had earned this position through demonstrated excellence and embodied the values upon which I'd built the company. That evening, Margaret joined me for dinner at the mansion, now our shared home 3 nights a week, with the remainder spent at her faculty residence near Columbia. "How does it feel?" she asked as we shared a bottle of wine in the garden. "Announcing the succession after all this time?" "Right," I replied simply. "Aisha will take Crosstech places I couldn't imagine. That's the point of proper succession. Not replication, but evolution." Margaret smiled. A far cry from Vanessa and Blake's vision. Their vision was never about Crosstech's future, I noted, only about their control of its assets. We fell silent, enjoying the garden that now reflected both Eleanor's original design and Margaret's thoughtful additions, a metaphor for life's continuity through change. "I received an interesting call today," Margaret said after a while. "From Blake, actually." I raised an eyebrow. "Oh, he's completing his master's in environmental engineering. His thesis project involves applications of our quantum storage technology in portable systems for emergency response. He wanted to discuss some technical aspects." "And?" "He's done impressive work," she admitted. "Creative approaches, solid mathematics, there's genuine talent there." I nodded, unsurprised yet pleased. He needed to find his own path, not grab for mine. The following weekend brought another milestone, a small gathering celebrating Judge Pierce's retirement from the bench. As we toasted his distinguished career, surrounded by friends who had stood by me through crisis, I found myself reflecting on the journey of the past 3 years. "A penny for your thoughts, Uncle Ben," said Eleanor, now a successful attorney in her own right, joining me on the terrace. "Just appreciating how life's worst moments sometimes lead to necessary corrections," I replied. 3 years ago I was sitting in a ballroom watching my wife and stepson plot my professional demise. And now I'm surrounded by authentic relationships, leading a company aligned with my values and planning a future with purpose." Eleanor smiled. "All because you refuse to let betrayal define you." Or perhaps because I finally recognized the difference between what I had and what I truly needed. 2 months later, I received an unexpected letter, handwritten, postmarked from San Francisco. Blake's careful script filled 3 pages with reflections I hadn't anticipated. "I've spent 3 years rebuilding my understanding of achievement and worth," he wrote. "The night you could have abandoned us to the Kazans, but chose instead to help. That forced me to question everything I thought I knew about power and success. Real strength, I've learned, lies not in controlling others, but in mastering oneself." The letter continued, not seeking forgiveness exactly, but acknowledging growth that wouldn't have occurred without the collapse of his entitled expectations. He closed with news of a job offer from a renewable energy startup and a simple question: would it be possible to visit Crosstech sometime? Not to reclaim anything, but to learn from the company you built with genuine vision. I wrote back the same day, "The door is open when you're ready." 6 months later, Blake visited Crosstech headquarters, not as the entitled heir apparent, but as an engineering professional interested in our quantum storage technology. I gave him the same tour I would offer any visiting colleague, noting with interest his thoughtful questions and genuine engagement with the technology. Over lunch in my office, he finally addressed the elephant in the room. "I owe you an apology, one I should have offered years ago. My arrogance, my entitlement, my willingness to take what I hadn't earned, I was completely wrong." "Yes, you were," I agreed, neither harsh nor particularly forgiving, but recognizing that is significant. "My new position starts next month," he said. "Entry-level engineering, nothing glamorous, but it's mine, earned through actual work." "That matters," I nodded. "Building rather than taking." As he prepared to leave, Blake hesitated at the door. "Can I ask you something? Why did you help us with the Kazans after everything we tried to do to you?" I considered the question carefully. "Because responding to cruelty diminishes us both, and because sometimes people deserve the chance to become better than they've been." That evening, sharing the interaction with Margaret over dinner, I found myself surprisingly at peace with this chapter of closure. "Will you ever fully trust him?" she asked pragmatically. "Probably not," I admitted. "But I can acknowledge his efforts to change without needing complete reconciliation. Some relationships are meant to find new forms rather than restore old ones." The following spring brought the formal announcement of Crosstech's succession plan to the public. Business publications featured profiles of Aisha Johnson alongside retrospectives of my career. The narrative that emerged wasn't about corporate drama, but about thoughtful evolution and meaningful innovation. In interviews, I emphasized the purpose that had always driven Crosstech, not merely profit, but genuine contribution. When asked about legacy, I pointed to the foundation's work rather than market capitalization or personal wealth. One journalist, more perceptive than most, asked about the attempted corporate takeover that had made headlines briefly 3 years earlier. Looking back, on that crisis, she inquired, "What did you learn about business and leadership?" I considered the question, aware that my answer would become part of Crosstech's public narrative. I learned that true value isn't measured by control or possession, but by purpose and integrity. Companies, like people, are defined not by what they acquire, but by what they contribute. On a perfect June evening, Margaret and I hosted a small gathering in the garden, a celebration of our official engagement. Judge Pierce offered a toast, Eleanor shared stories of our parallel journeys, and Caroline presented a bound collection of Crosstech's most significant patents. As twilight settled over the roses that Eleanor had planted and Margaret had tended, I found myself profoundly grateful for this unexpected chapter of my life. The betrayal that had once threatened everything had ultimately cleared the way for something more authentic. "Happy?" Margaret asked, finding me alone by the garden fountain. "Deeply," I replied, taking her hand, "though content might be more accurate." She nodded, understanding the distinction. "Happiness comes and goes. Contentment has roots." Later that night, after our guests had departed, we sat in comfortable silence on the terrace. The mansion no longer felt like Vanessa's showcase or my solitary retreat, but our shared home, warm with genuine connection and meaningful purpose. "I was thinking about what you said to Blake," Margaret mused, "about people deserving the chance to become better than they've been, a principle I've tried to live by." I acknowledged. "It applies to opportunities as well as challenges," she noted. You've become better than you were, not despite Vanessa's betrayal, but partly because of how you chose to respond to it. The observation resonated deeply. The crisis that had seemed devastating had ultimately freed me to build something more authentic, in business, in relationships, in purpose. 3 years earlier, I had sat in that ballroom, humiliated, as Vanessa whispered to Blake about my irrelevance. I had felt invisible, erased from the life I had built. Now, surrounded by genuine connections and leading with renewed purpose, I recognized that the true measure of relevance had nothing to do with age or control, but with integrity and meaningful contribution. The path forward stretched clear and purposeful, not centered on proving my worth to others, but on living according to values I'd clarified through crisis. Crosstech would continue its evolution under Aisha's leadership. The foundation would extend our impact beyond business metrics. Margaret and I would build our shared chapter with the wisdom of experience. As for Vanessa and Blake, they too had found consequences and opportunities in the aftermath of betrayal. Their paths had diverged from mine, yet each of us had been forced to confront essential truths about ourselves. Looking out over the moonlit garden, I felt a profound sense of completion. Not because every challenge was resolved or every wound healed, but because I had found my way back to authenticity. The empire I had built mattered less than the integrity with which I'd rebuilt my life. In the end, this was the true victory, not over Vanessa and Blake, but over the temptation to let betrayal define me. I had reclaimed not just my company and my home, but something far more valuable, the quiet dignity of living by my own best principles.